The spring air hung heavy and sticky as music pulsated through the crowded house, signaling the start of another wild student party. Fairy lights twinkled among the shadows cast by dim lamps, creating an ambiance that was part magical, part seedy. Mia, a petite first-year student, stood in a corner, her curls wild and her hazel eyes widening at the chaos around her. She had agreed to come to the party with some friends from her English literature seminar, but they had long since disappeared into the sea of bodies, leaving her feeling more than a little lost. The red dress she wore was a daring departure from her usual attire, borrowed from a friend who had insisted it would be perfect for a night like this. It hugged her curves, showcasing her slender figure, and made her feel exposed under the appreciative glances of the partygoers. Mia typically preferred less attention-grabbing outfits, but tonight she wanted to shed her shy demeanor, if only for a few hours. "What you doing over here all alone, pretty lady?" A deep voice cut through the music, causing Mia to startle. She turned to see a young man with tousled brown hair and striking blue eyes. His features were handsome in a rugged way, especially with the mischievous smirk that played on his lips. Mia recognized him instantly. It was Jake, her stepbrother. She often found herself fascinated and exasperated by his undeniable charm. They had been thrown together as family 2 years ago when their parents married, merging their lives in ways neither could have predicted. While Mia was reserved, Jake was outgoing and brash. He often attracted trouble and attention in equal measure. Over time, their relationship had developed a strange dynamic, full of playful banter, heated arguments, and moments where the boundary between siblings and something more seemed paper-thin. "Hey, Jake," she replied, her voice nearly lost under the pulsing beat of the music. "I could ask the same of you. Aren't you a little old to be crashing a freshman party?" He laughed, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "You know me, Mia. Age is just a number. Besides," he leaned closer, his warm breath tickling her ear, "I heard this party had the best booze. I had to come and sample the goods." As he spoke, Mia caught glimpses of their reflection in a nearby mirror. With their similar eye colors and messy dark hair, they did look remarkably similar. It was a notion that had crossed her mind more than once, and one that often resulted in her feeling flustered. "Well, a dry campus isn't exactly my cup of tea," she said, brushing off her musings, "and I doubt anyone has mistaken you for a fresh-faced kid. You're a bit too—" She trailed off, searching for the right word. "Scruffy?" Jake supplied, running a hand through his hair, causing it to stick up even more. "A bit wild? You can say it, sis. I won't be offended." Mia caught the laughter in his eyes, the open challenge. "I was going to say captivating," she murmured, her pulse quickening as she realized the possible implications of her words. A group of Jake's friends stumbled past, one of them slurring a greeting in their direction. "Hey, Stone, who's your new girlfriend? She's a cutie." Mia felt her face heat up as Jake's arm slid around her waist, pulling her closer. "I've been telling her that all night," he said, his voice filled with feigned indignation. "But she's stubborn and won't admit it." There was a commotion as another friend playfully shoved Jake, nearly spilling his drink. "Admit what?" the friend asked, his words slurred. "That you two are a great match? Finally the perfect pair. Get a room already, will ya?" The group roared with laughter, and Mia could feel her cheeks turning bright red. Jake's grip on her tightened, and she couldn't ignore the heat from his body warming her side. "Ignore them," he said, his voice low and a little too intimate. "They're drunk, always saying ridiculous things." She looked up at him, their eyes meeting for a moment before she glanced away, a curious mix of emotions stirring within her. Mia had always prided herself on being different from the girls who fawned over her stepbrother. But tonight, with the alcohol and the proximity of his body, she found her resolve wavering. As the party continued, Mia and Jake stayed close, drawn to each other like magnets. Was it the alcohol fueling this clandestine connection? Or was there something more simmering beneath the surface? Something that had been there all along, waiting to be acknowledged. Mia had always been keenly aware of her effect on others, her slight frame and delicate features often drawing glances. But tonight, she felt a different kind of power, a magnetism that had nothing to do with her youthful charm. As she sat across from Jake in the car, her fingers danced along the soft skin of her inner thigh, a deliberate caress that was both innocent and provocative. The red dress, now creased from the night's activities, revealed more than it concealed, and she knew the suggestive display was a potent lure. The scent of his cologne mingled with the leather seats, a mix of fresh cinnamon and sandalwood that she often associated with him. His profile was striking in the low light, strong jawline accentuated by the glow of passing street lamps. His eyes, a vivid blue, flickered between the road and her, the smirk on his lips belying the tension in his body. "You look..." He paused, searching for the right word, his gaze drifting over her exposed legs, slender and golden in the dashboard's warm glow. "Irresistible." Mia held his gaze, her hand continuing its ascent, slowing to a teasing pause just short of her destination. "That's me, the irresistible force, and you're..." Her voice lowered to a purr. "An immovable object." He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing, and she delighted in the ability to elicit such a raw response from this seemingly confident man. "Not so immovable right now?" he confessed, his voice gravelly. Her laughter floated in the air, high and musical, a contrast to the unbridled energy that crackled between them. Leaning forward, she let her hair, a cascade of dark curls, fall like a curtain around them. The scent of her, a mix of her perfume and the faint aroma of spilled drinks from the party, filled his senses. "What are you doing, Mia?" There was a note of warning in his tone, yet he made no move to stop her as her hand slid further, tempting fate and propriety. Her fingers skimmed the edge of her lacy undergarment, and his eyes darkened with desire. She watched him, enjoying the play of emotions across his handsome face, the struggle between lust and restraint. Her thumb brushed against her, a gentle caress that made her breath catch. "Just seeing if you're as bold as you pretend to be," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremors within. "Or is that all an act?" Jake's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles pale against the leather. "You know I'm not one for playing games, Mia." She moved then, swiftly, closing the distance between them. Her lips brushed his, a mere whisper of a kiss that left them both wanting. "Then prove it, Jake. Show me just how bold you can be." His response was immediate, his free hand cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing her jawline with exquisite tenderness. He traced the curve of her lower lip, a silent entreaty before his mouth claimed hers in a searing kiss, hot and wet. Mia's fingers dug into his shoulders, and she could taste the night on his tongue. The beer, the hint of cigarettes, and the sweet essence that was uniquely Jake. Breaking the kiss, she laughed breathlessly, feeling wild and alive. "Well, you were right about one thing. That was definitely bold." He exhaled slowly, his eyes holding a mixture of hunger and hesitation. I don't want to overstep, Mia. She placed a finger on his lips, silencing him. "No more talking, Jake. Let's just see where the night takes us." As the drive continued, every curve and bump in the road sent a tremor of anticipation through her. The air in the car had thickened, charged with unspoken desires and possibilities. She wondered if he could feel the pounding of her heart, or whether her ragged breath mirrored his own. In the quiet of the car, as the city lights streamed past, Mia's nervous confidence grew into something more profound. This wasn't just about pushing boundaries. It was about embracing a raw, undeniable connection with a man who, against all logic, she was irresistibly drawn to. When Jake finally parked the car, Mia felt a momentary disappointment that the heady ride was over. But as she glanced at him, she saw the storm brewing in his eyes, and she knew the night was far from over. Her heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of anxiety and eagerness, as they emerged from the car to face whatever lay ahead. Mia's post-party mornings were usually spent nursing a hangover with a large cup of strong coffee, and this day was no different. She stumbled into the kitchen, her head pounding in unison with the rhythmic beat that still echoed from the party's afterglow in her mind. Jake was already there, the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the clean, woody scent that clung to him from his morning shower. His hair, still damp, fell casually across his forehead, accentuating his chiseled features. "Hey," he greeted, his voice husky from sleep. He poured a mug of coffee and slid it across the counter towards her. "Thanks," Mia managed, her voice scratchy, as she wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic mug. The first sip was heavenly, the coffee's bitter warmth sliding down her throat, soothing the remnants of the previous night's escapades. Jake leaned against the counter, arms folded, observing her with an intensity that made her fingers tighten around the mug. "You look well-rested," he remarked, a hint of sarcasm in his tone. She smiled, feeling slightly self-conscious under his unwavering gaze. "It was a great night, don't you think?" Her voice was bold, inviting him to acknowledge the unspoken memories they shared. His eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of something hot and intense flashing across his features before he looked away. "Yeah, it was." There was an unspoken understanding in those 4 words, a tacit acknowledgement of the tension that had charged the air between them just hours ago. But Mia wasn't one to let things lie, especially not now that she had taken the first steps towards acting on the desire she'd been sensing in him for so long. Over the next few days, Mia made sure to draw Jake's attention whenever she could. She shed her usual layers, going braless beneath thin tank tops, letting the material hug her body and reveal the slightest hint of her breasts when she moved. She wore shorts so short they left little to the imagination, reveling in the knowledge that her stepbrother's eyes were always on her, even if only for a stolen glance. While they lounged in the living room one afternoon, Mia made a point of stretching languidly as she got up from the sofa, her tank top riding up, giving Jake a glimpse of her bare midriff. She sauntered to the fridge, and as she bent to retrieve a drink, she lingered, ensuring her back was arched enough to showcase her curves to full effect. Jake cleared his throat from the couch, but Mia ignored him, closing the fridge door slowly, a satisfied smirk on her lips as she held his gaze, her eyes sparkling with challenge. On another day, Mia returned from the store, laden with grocery bags. Jake sat on the sofa, flipping through TV channels. As she set the bags down, her tank top rode up, exposing the smooth, tanned skin. She turned to face him, catching his eyes on her where they briefly lingered on her bare skin, before flitting guiltily away. "Need some help?" she asked, her voice laced with mischief as she gestured towards the sofa, deliberately emphasizing the length of her exposed thighs. He looked away quickly, a hint of color tinging his cheeks. "Nah, I'm good. It's nice to see you home, though. You're always out with your friends." Mia detected a hint of jealousy in his tone, a possessiveness that intrigued her. She took a step towards him, narrowing the gap between them. "It's my day off from them," she purred, her eyes holding his. His eyes flickered over her form, lingering a little too long on her legs before he tore his gaze away. "Just make sure you don't overwork yourself helping me," he joked, attempting to lighten the suddenly electric atmosphere. She laughed softly, her hand brushing his as she walked past, an innocent touch that sent sparks through them both. "I'll keep that in mind," she said as she headed for the stairs, the sound of Jake's shower starting just moments later. The steamy shower scenes were on hold for now, as Mia let the game of seduction unfold at its own delicious pace, each moment building towards the next until their simmering desires could no longer be denied. Mia floated through the house, a mischievous grin playing on her lips as she recalled the earlier moment in the living room. The subtle dance of seduction that she had been choreographing with Jake was intensifying, each step drawing them closer to a precipice that she both dreaded and yearned to approach. Setting her recently purchased fruits on the kitchen counter, she listened intently, her pulse quickening at the sound of Jake's shower upstairs. A thrill of anticipation raced down her spine as she recalled the sight of his muscled physique glistening with water droplets, a vision that had haunted her since the incident in the bathroom. Determination sparked in her, and she smoothed down her lightly damp hair, still bearing the traces of outdoor humidity. She sauntered towards the bathroom, her bare feet silent on the carpeted stairs, her heart pounding in anticipation of the potential encounter. As she reached the bathroom door, The curtain of steam escaping from beneath it caressed her face, a teasing preview of the heat that lay beyond. Mia's eyes fluttered shut for a brief moment as she inhaled the steamy air, thick with the scent of Jake's shampoo and soap. She opened her eyes, the image of Jake's wet, toned body vividly imprinted in her mind's eye. Taking a breath, she pushed the door open. Jake's startled cry reverberated off the shower's tiled walls as Mia stepped into the bathroom. "Mia, what the—" She chuckled low, the sound sinuous and suggestive in the intimate space, deliberately designed to coax and compel. "Just offering my help if you need it." His gaze raked over her, his eyes darkening as his body tautened visibly. The water continued to cascade over his muscular frame, emphasizing the play of hard planes and sculpted curves. "You couldn't have waited until I'm out of the shower?" he growled, his tone suggesting otherwise. Mia's gaze lingered on the trail of droplets that traced tantalizing paths over his shoulders, chest, and abdomen before disappearing beneath the spray. "I think you're well aware I couldn't wait any longer, Jake." Her voice was low and husky, mirroring her intent. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken desires and the echoing of the shower's steady beat. Finally, Jake cleared his throat, breaking the spellbinding hush. "We shouldn't. This is crazy. We're step-siblings." Mia finished for him, her eyes never wavering from his as she took a step closer, savoring the heat emanating from his body. "But we're also adults, Jake. Don't you wonder what it would be like?" His eyes had flickered shut, as if denying himself the sight of her standing there, temptress-like, luring him with her subtle but explicit offer. "You know, I've wondered," he admitted, his voice gruff. "But it's—" Mia cut him off, her fingers gently silencing his unspoken protestations. "It's okay," she whispered, moving even closer, the heat of her body now just a breath away from his. "I understand. And I feel the same." He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. "This shouldn't happen," he whispered horadically, reaching out almost as if to push her away, but instead his hand hovered, tremoting just above her skin. "Why not?" she asked, her voice barely above a breath as she leaned forward, her lips a hair's breadth from his. "We're both consenting adults, drawn to each other by a force beyond our control." Jake's grip on the shower controls tightened, the sharp click of the temperature adjustment punctuating the moment as he struggled to maintain control over his body's reaction to her allure. "And what if we can't stop?" he managed, his eyes flashing open to hold hers. "Maybe we shouldn't," she murmured, her lips now so close they barely parted the words. And then, with a swift motion, she stepped back, the spray of water that had enveloped them now becoming a barrier once more. She reached for the door handle, the steamy haze clinging to her skin as she turned to leave. "Mia, wait!" Jake called out, his voice hoarse, filled with a mix of relief and longing. She halted, but did not turn, her hand lingering on the doorknob, her heart pounding with a concoction of excitement, fear, and desire. He continued, a raw vulnerability crept into his tone. I can't. It's wrong." Mia's hand fell away from the door, her back to him as she spoke, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions within her. "I understand, but I won't pretend it's not mutual, Jake. If the moment comes when you can't resist anymore, don't expect me to. I won't apologize for my feelings." On that note, she pulled the door open, slipping out of the steamy bathroom and the burning gaze of her stepbrother, her body thrumming with the knowledge that, one way or another, something between them had irrevocably changed. The hands of the antique clock inched toward the 1 a.m. mark as Mia made her way down the corridor, her decision bolder by the minute. Her skin whispered against the soft fabric of her nightwear as she stood outside Jake's bedroom, her breath catching in anticipation. A cool breeze snaked through the slightly ajar door, carrying with it the subtle scent of Jake's cologne. Mia's heart pounded as she pushed the door open, her eyes adjusting to the moonlight-bathed room. Jake lay on his side, his bare chest rising and falling with steady breaths. His hair, tousled from sleep, fell across his forehead, softening the sharp lines of his profile. "Jake," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet room. His eyes flickered open, the blue of his irises startling in the dim light. "Mia?" The surprise in his voice was evident, but he didn't protest, merely turned onto his back, his arms folded behind his head. "What's the matter?" She hesitated at the foot of the bed, her hand twisting the hem of her nightshirt. "Just couldn't sleep." The words barely disguised her true intentions. He studied her through the half-light, his gaze flicking over her exposed legs, illuminated by the silvery glow from the window. "Come on, then." He patted the bed beside him, his action and tone revealing a mix of resignation and eagerness. Mia's heart quickened as she slid onto the bed. The sheets were still warm from Jake's body heat, and a spicy, masculine scent hung in the air, mingling with the scent of her perfume. "You know, Mia," Jake began, his voice low. "We can talk about anything that's on your mind, Her hand, moving as if with a will of its own, found his, their fingers lacing together in a familiar yet charged gesture. "Not everything can be said with words, Jake." Their eyes locked, holding the weight of unspoken words, desires, and questions. The silence stretched, filled only with the chorus of their breathing, growing more labored by the second. With a deliberate slowness that sent a shiver through Jake, Mia leaned forward, brushing her lips against his, a soft, fleeting caress that spoke volumes. His breath hitched, and as she pulled back, her hand inched under the sheet, fingers seeking out the heat of his arousal, which had been simmering just beneath the surface all day. A sharp intake of breath betrayed Jake's surprise at her boldness, but he made no move to stop her, his body tense beneath her touch. Her fingers closed around him, and she began a slow, torturous rhythm that had him arching into her palm, his head falling back, his throat exposed and taut. "Mia, you don't..." His voice trailed off, his eyes clenching shut at the waves of pleasure she was expertly eliciting. "Shh," she whispered, her free hand coming up to trace the sharp line of his jaw, her thumb brushing his parted lips. "Let me do this for you." Her movements were deliberate, knowing, her touch light and yet firm, a teasing exploration that had him groaning, his body trembling with the effort to keep still. As he neared the precipice, she quickened her pace, her breath hot against his ear as she whispered, "Jake, let go." His finale was violent, his body trembling under her touch, a hoarse cry escaping him. In the aftermath, neither spoke, both caught in the vortex of the moment, her hands still clasped around him, his fingers now lacing through hers. Their rapid breaths began to slow, the only sound the gentle rustle of the sheets and the soft, rhythmic ticking of the clock. Then, with a reluctant sigh, Mia disentangled herself from Jake's grasp, his eyes heavy with both satisfaction and questions that hung unspoken in the air. She rose, the sheet falling away to reveal her slim silhouette, the sheer nightgown accentuating rather than concealing. "Why?" Jake's voice was barely a rasp, thick with unspoken desires and the weight of their shared secret. Mia smoothed down her nightshirt, her eyes holding his. "I couldn't sleep for thinking about you." Her voice was soft, a declaration and an apology all at once. Without another word she turned, leaving him to the riot of emotions and the trail of her scent that lingered in his room. Her footsteps made no sound as she retraced her path down the corridor, her heart a tumult of emotions, guilt, arousal, and a sense of power that both thrilled and terrified her. She slipped back into her own bed, her mind still thrumming with the memory of his touch, his taste, and the sound of his unrestrained pleasure. The tentative beginnings of a plan formed in her mind, a game that only she knew the rules to, and one that she intended to continue playing until it reached its startling, satisfying conclusion. When morning broke, the sun's rays slicing through the curtains, Mia woke with a sense of purpose. Her thoughts immediately turned to Jake, to the heat of his skin against hers, the taste of his breath, and the feeling of his body's surrender to her touch. She stretched languorously, a slow smile spreading across her face, plotting her next moves in the delicate dance of seduction she had set in motion. As she descended the stairs, her bare feet silent on the carpet, the scent of freshly brewed coffee teased her senses, guiding her towards the kitchen. Jake stood by the counter, his broad back to her, shoulders moving rhythmically as he stirred his mug, his movements imitating the motion of their lips the night before. Mia's steps quickened at the vision before her. She entered the kitchen on a wave of confidence, her hips swaying with every step, the silken nightgown whispering against her legs as she moved. "Morning, Jake," she purred, her voice a deliberate contrast to the restless energy building within her. His head turned, the corner of his mouth twitching at the sight of her standing there, all tousled hair and bare skin beneath the sheer material. "Morning," he grunted, the single syllable conveying a world of unspoken sentiments. Mia brushed past him, her shoulder lightly grazing his, her intention obvious in the way her body lingered against his for a moment, as if marking her territory. She saw his chest rise and fall with a sharp inhale and exhale, but he said nothing, merely turned back to his coffee, his hands gripping the mug with renewed intensity. The day unfolded with increasing tension, more tangible than the Florida humidity pressing against the windows. Mia flitted around the house in flimsy clothing, an accidental seductress, her every movement a siren song that Jake tried to ignore, his focus wavering between work and the delectable distraction moving around him. They reconvened at dinner, picking at the meal as if the entree were an afterthought to the main course of their simmering undercurrents. Wine loosened their tongues, and soon talk turned to past relationships, an innocuous topic that quickly became loaded with double entendre and innuendo. "Remember that guy, Josh? We called him One Pump Chump behind his back," Mia laughed, her eyes sparkling with mischief as she took another sip of wine. "I bet you could show him a thing or two." Jake choked on his mouthful of wine, a heated look in his eyes as he wiped his mouth with the backet. "I don't recall that nickname, but I guess he was just unfortunate." "Unfortunate not to last longer with you," she teased, her knee brushing his under the table, a fleeting touch that was not accidental. He shifted in his seat, his face betraying the battle between restraint and desire. "Well, Mia, I'm sure you could show him a thing or two as well, couldn't you?" She leaned forward, her cleavage suddenly more prominent, an invitation as clear as daylight. "Oh, I could try, but I think you'd do a much better job." Jake's breath hitched, and for a moment it seemed like he might reach for her across the table, but he restrained himself, gripping his fork so tightly it was a wonder the metal didn't bend. When dinner concluded, Mia suggested watching a movie. Jake readily agreed, the notion of a distraction from their escalating tension appealing to them both. Seated beside each other on the plush couch, their thighs touching, they stared at the screen, though their attention was elsewhere. The film was a sultry romance, featuring a couple whose relationship burned with palpable chemistry. As the actors engaged in a steamy sex scene, Mia's hand, supposedly reaching for the wine glass on the coffee table, grazed Jake's arm, sending an electric shock through him. He turned to her, desire blazing in his eyes, the veneer of control he had maintained all day beginning to crack. "Enough of this." In a swift motion, he set down his glass and pulled her against him, capturing her mouth with his. The kiss was raw and demanding, his lips bruising in their hunger, seeking to devour rather than explore. Mia melted into his embrace, returning his fervor with equal intensity, her fingers threading through his hair as she encouraged his desire, their tongues dueling in a silent battle for dominance. The movie played on, its soundtrack a distant echo to the sound of their ragged breathing and the rustle of clothing as they tore at each other's bodies, needing to feel skin against skin, to consume and be consumed. Just as their hands moved to explore, to learn and take, the scene changed, pulling them back to reality. They broke apart, chests heaving, their lips bruised and swollen, eyes hooded with desire. Jake's hand hovered in the air, inches from Mia's face, as if deciding whether to continue where they'd left off or retreat to safer ground. Her own hand mirrored his, poised like an angel at the threshold of damnation, fingers curving towards the promise of his touch. Their eyes locked, the air between them thrumming with the charge of what had happened and what was yet to be, as the silence of the room asked a question neither of them was ready to answer. Passion erupted between them, a force as natural as the tides, as raw as the elements. Jake's lips claimed Mia's, demanding and insistent, every kiss a declaration of pent-up longing. Her hands, feverish with desire, explored the hard planes of his chest, the muscles tense beneath her fingers. He responded with a low growl, more animal than man, as he tugged at her shirt, exposing the delicate mounds of her breasts, the lace of her bra a tease against the skin. She arched into his touch, her body moving in a sensuous rhythm, an invitation that could not be ignored. As she straddled, their movements took on a life of their own, each thrust and grind a dance of primal needs. The denim of his jeans, rough against her sensitive skin, amplified the sensations, sparking an inferno of desire. Breathing heavy, they tore at each other's clothing, seeking the release of skin on skin. Their feverish hands left no inch untouched, exploring each other's bodies with desperate urgency, mapping curves, slopes, and hollows, learning each other's desires in the language of touch. Jake pulled her close, nipping at her earlobe, his breath hot against her neck. "You're driving me wild," he whispered, his voice hoarse with want. She responded by nipping his ear, her fingers tracing his chest, sparking a series of sensations that had him shuddering. "And you are maddening," she purred, her words a challenge as much as a promise. Their exploration intensified, mouths and hands finding new pleasures. The sofa below them groaned under the weight of their passion, an observer to their heated dance. Jake's hands traveled down, a sensual journey that left her trembling until they reached the button of her jeans. He paused, his lips trailing a line of fire from her jaw, along her neck, and down to her collarbone, his breath tickling her skin as he whispered, "Are you sure?" "Yes," she whispered back, her eyes holding his, fear mingling with desire in their depths. "More than sure." His fingers deftly worked the button, his hand sliding within to caress her intimately. She gasped, her body arching, her hands clutching his shoulders as his mouth found her, sending waves of pleasure through her. The room echoed with her moans, each breath a plea for more as he gently urged her towards a pleasure-drenched precipice. Just as she was about to fall into the abyss of ecstasy, he slowed, pulled her up, his eyes dark with the promise of more. "Not yet. Not here," he murmured, his rough whisper belying the tremorous, needful want in his voice. She laughed, the sound a mix of desire and defiance, and tugged at his jeans. He stood, a potent force, and let her undress him, their hands a tangle of lust and urgency. In a blur of movement, they charged up the stairs, their naked bodies entwined, the heat of their need a palpable entity. The door to his bedroom swung open, the candles on his nightstand casting a warm glow over the room. They collided with the bed, a tangle of limbs and lips, their mouths urgent, their hands expert, the bedding rustling beneath them like whispers of encouragement. Here, in the sanctuary of their shared desires, they delved deep into each other, flesh meeting flesh in an intricate dance of intimacy and abandonment. The bedroom enveloped them in its warm amber glow as they surged onto the bed, their movements a graceful storm of unspoken desires. Mia felt her heart racing as Jake positioned himself above her, his gaze intense, mirroring the tempest within her own soul. Their lips connected, sealing the promise of unbound pleasure, while their bodies continued the dialogue initiated in the shadows of the hallway and the lounge below. Every brush of skin, every caress, conveyed what words could not, a silent testimony to the depth of their shared want. Jake shifted his weight, leaning into her, his embrace pressing them further into the yielding mattress. She opened herself to him, eager for the connection that only their union could bring. It was a realization of their deepest needs and wants, a silent conversation in a language only they could understand. The creak of the bed became a harmonic accompaniment to their escalating rhythm, each move a declaration of passion and the urgency of their desire to merge fully. Mia's fingers dug into Jake's back, a sign of her commitment to the moment, and the intensity of their engagement increased with each rush of breath and whisper of their names. He adjusted his approach, perfect harmony that only their bodies could comprehend. Every movement was deliberate, yet unconscious, a dance they had rehearsed 1,000 times in their minds. The room filled with the sound of their shared experience, The only melody their ragged breathing and the sometimes labored, sometimes playful moans escaping their lips, punctuating the primal composition. In this shared symphony, they found a pace that satisfied and propelled them further, each driving the other to the brink. With a fierce growl, Jake claimed the moment, his body tense, and Mia responded, her cry ascending to a keen edge. After, they remained in their post-dance tangle, their bodies heaving in sync, reveling in the afterglow of shared satisfaction. Mia's eyes met Jake's, holding his gaze as though searching for unspoken truths in the other's soul. Jake's fingers traced the curve of her face in a tender caress, as if to erase the intensity of their shared moment, a temporary reprieve from the reality of what had just transpired. "What have we done?" he whispered, his voice laden with a mixture of desire, urgency, and underlying concern. Mia took a moment, sensing the gravity of her decision, her heart still pounding from both their shared embrace and the awareness that life would never be the same. "We've made a choice, Jake, and I think we both know there's no turning back from this point on." He held her hand, his grip strong, his expression a blend of emotions. "True, but isn't that what we both secretly wanted all along?" She acknowledged the truth in his statement with a simple nod, understanding the multifaceted implications of their actions, the forbidden territory they now inhabited, and the fact that, despite the inherent risks, the fulfillment of their desires made it all worth it. In the aftermath of their passionate surrender, they found a new equilibrium, an understanding formed through the unspoken words that passionate engagement had brought to the surface. Their silence, for now, spoke volumes, leaving the weighty task of navigating the consequences to another day. The dawn crept in, painting the world in muted shades of gray, reflecting the ambiguous state of mind both Mia and Jake were in as they stirred awake, their senses gradually returning from the blissful days of their slumber. Mia was the first to rouse, her hand reaching instinctively for Jake's arm that rested heavily across her waist, her fingers tracing the muscles of his forearm, a silent testament to the passion that had brought them here. As she slowly began to disentangle herself from Jake's grasp, her movements elicited a soft grunt from him, and his eyes flickered open, a mix of sleepiness and confusion in their ocean-blue depths. The events of the previous night came flooding back to her as she lingered on him, her heart pounding in a mix of emotions, exhilaration, fear, and a touch of shame washing over her. Slipping out of bed, Mia pulled on Jake's oversized shirt, the scent of him comfortingly familiar as she made her way downstairs. The memories of the night before replayed in her mind like a seductive whisper, tempting her to turn and look back, but she kept her eyes forward, focusing on the wooden staircase beneath her feet, each step leading her further away from the raw vulnerability of their shared intimacy. The house was quiet, the only sounds the rhythmic ticking of the kitchen clock and the low hum of the refrigerator. She had the fleeting thought that it was much like the calm before the storm, the peace offering a temporary reprieve from the surge of emotions and unspoken words that she knew were coming. Lost in her thoughts, she found herself in the kitchen, padding softly across the hardwood floor. As she filled the kettle, the sound of Jake's heavy footsteps on the stairs made her heart skip a beat. She was acutely aware of his presence even before she felt his hand on the small of her back, a familiar yet now charged touch that sent a shiver through her body. "Good morning," he said hoarsely as he joined her, his voice gravelly from sleep and perhaps something more. Mia nodded in response, unable to summon words past the emotion clogging her throat, a blend of shame, excitement, and an unnameable desire that made her spine tingle, body flush, and mind whirl. Silence stretched between them like an elastic thread, taut with the weight of unspoken words, secrets, confessions, and a raw sensuality that threatened to spill out with every loaded glance. She busied herself with preparing coffee, the routine motions grounding her in a world that felt suddenly topsy-turvy. As she reached for her mug, Jake's fingers grazed hers across the countertop, a touch so light it could have been accidental, yet it sent an electric current through her. Their eyes met, a silent pact formed in that fleeting moment of connection, understanding passed without the need for words. They weren't ready for the answers they knew lurked in the shadows, for the implications of what their actions might mean for their intertwined fates. Instead, they chose to linger in this tenuous space, aware of the raw, pulsing tension that simmered just beneath the surface of their every interaction. The minutes ticked by, each passing second an agonizing choice not to act, not to speak, to merely stand there in the budding light of a new dawn, weighing the decision of whether to forge ahead or step back from the precipice of this undefined yet powerful dynamic. Our story leaves Mia and Jake balanced on a razor's edge of decision, the scent of temptation heavy in the air, leaving us wondering, is this the culmination of a single passionate night, or merely the beginning of a tempestuous journey they have no hope of undoing?